Alright, in this video we're actually going to cover our next two types of tissues. We're going to look at both muscle and nervous. And so our next tissue type is going to be muscle tissue. And one of the unique features is that it is excitable. And so when it gets excited, the muscle fibers can respond and they can contract. And that contraction is what allows for movement. And so our muscles are going to be important for helping our body to move. We have three types. We have skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle, and we're going to take a closer look at each one of those. So with skeletal muscle, it's called skeletal because it is attached to the skeleton. Okay, it's attached to bone, and the skeletal muscle is important because it allows for voluntary movement. The skeletal muscle allows us to do the movements that we have control over. So if I want to walk, if I want to raise my hand, if I want to write with my pen, all of those things are going to be voluntary movements. And so some of the features of skeletal muscle is that the cells are long and cylindrical. You can see that they're kind of almost cigar-like. Sometimes that's how they're described. And they are multinucleate, which means they have many nuclei, and you can see that these nuclei often get squished to the sides here. But there is more than one nucleus per cell. And so we have these long muscle fibers which serve as their cells. And then another unique feature is that they are striated. And the striations mean that it appears striped. And we're not talking about the fibers going this way. We're talking about the stripes that are going kind of against the grain. And so you can see that there are striations or stripes all along that tissue. And so your skeletal muscle is going to have those unique features of the cylindrical tubes, the multinucleate, and the striations. Our next muscle type is cardiac, and as the name cardiac implies, hopefully you know that that means heart. And so it is specifically in the myocardium, which is the big, thick middle layer of the heart. Remember that organs are made up of many different types of tissues, so it's not the whole heart, it's just going to be the myocardium, which is going to be the muscle in the middle, that thick layer there. And this is what allows for the heart to pump blood. Now, we don't have to tell our heart to do that, so this is going to be under involuntary control. And the cells are going to be similar to skeletal muscle, but there are a couple of distinct differences. So once again, we have cylindrical cells, but they're also branched. And you can see that in the picture, they're not quite as uniform in their alignment. You kind of have the branching of these cells, and so that kind of gives them a little more irregular of a look, these little gaps here. Now, they have only one nucleus in their cells, but one of the identifying characteristics are these intercalated discs. And so that's going to be these kind of bolder lines that are going across those muscle fibers. And what these little discs are is they're a type of gap junction, and it allows some chemical signaling to happen in the heart. And so these are going to be a big identifier when it comes to your cardiac muscle. And like the skeletal muscle, they are striated. A lot of times it's not quite as evident, but you can see those stripes going against that muscle fiber. And then our third type of muscle tissue is smooth muscle, and it's referred to as smooth because it is not striated. So when you're looking at smooth muscle under the microscope, you don't see those stripes going across the tissue. Like the cardiac, the smooth muscle is under involuntary control. We don't have to tell our digestive tract or our respiratory tract or our bladder or things like that to work. They're just automatic. Our brain takes care of it for us. And so where you'll find your smooth muscle is in the hollow walls of organs and passageways. So pretty much your whole digestive tract, your esophagus, into your stomach, into your intestines, your blood vessels. You also have some smooth muscles in your skin called your arrector pili. There's some smooth muscles in your eyes. And pretty much because they're in these passageways, they're going to be responsible for moving food along the tract, allowing you to empty your bladder, constricting and dilating your blood vessels. Same thing for your respiratory passageways. And so this is going to be a little bit different in their shape as well, in that their cells are going to be tapered. They're not quite as cylindrical. Sometimes this is referred to as spindle shape. They kind of are tapered at the ends like this. And so they're not quite like cigar shaped like some of the others. And they're also going to have one nucleus per cell. And so let's match the description. You can have more than one answer. Okay, branch cells, that was cardiac. Single nucleus, that is actually a couple of them. The single nucleus can be found in both the cardiac and the smooth. The striated, that's going to be a couple. The skeletal muscle is striated, cardiac muscle is striated. Involuntary, that's also going to be two. The cardiac was involuntary, smooth was involuntary. Attached to bone is skeletal. Multinucleate is skeletal. The intercalated disc, that's going to be your cardiac. Those are those special gap junctions. Not striated is your smooth, which is why it's smooth. Myocardium of the heart would be cardiac. Involuntary would be your skeletal muscle. Those are the only muscles that we have conscious control over. All right, which of these characteristics applies to smooth muscle? Okay, we know that smooth is unstriated, so we can take out those two. And when it comes to voluntary versus involuntary, I cannot control my smooth muscles, so this is going to be my answer. All right, we're also going to go ahead and cover nervous tissue in this video. Nervous tissue is our last and final tissue type, and like muscle, it is going to be excitable. But this time what's going to happen is we're going to see the propagation of an electrical signal. We're going to call that a nerve impulse or an action potential. And so these action potentials are going to be carried along our nerve cells called neurons, and that's what's going to allow for the nervous system to pretty much control and regulate everything. It's going to tell our muscles to move. It's just going to regulate the many activities in our bodies. And so we're going to find nervous tissue in the brain and the spinal cord and the nerves, which are the main parts of the nervous system. And your nervous tissue is made up of very special cells called neurons. They're highly specialized to do their job, as well as some support cells known as neuroglia or glial cells. And so we are going to spend a little bit of time with neurons because they're a very special cell and they do a very special job. And so these neurons are going to conduct electrical current in the form of action potentials. And when we get to the nervous system, we're going to learn about those in great detail and exactly what takes place. But for now, we just need to focus on 4 parts of the neuron. All right, you have the dendrites, which are going to be your receivers. And so these are all my dendrites over here. These are going to be the receivers of the message. So they're going to receive the sensory information that's either coming from your sensory structures like your touch sensors, your pain sensors, your temperature sensors, or they're going to be receiving information from other neurons. Now, that message is going to go through the cell body or the soma, and that's just essentially the main part of the cell that has your organelles. Okay, it's got the nucleus, mitochondria, all those types of things. So the dendrites are going to take in the signal, they're going to receive the message, and then it's going to pass down the neuron via the axon. So the axon is kind of like the tail of the neuron, and it's going to carry the message away from the cell body. Okay, we'll talk about later how it can be insulated. Okay, and then the axon terminals are going to be the ends of your axon. Now, this action potential is an electrical signal, and so as it's traveling down your neuron, it's kind of like electricity. But once it gets to the end, that electrical current can't jump from one place to another. And so what has to happen is that electrical signal has got to be converted into a chemical signal. And what's going to happen here at these axon terminals is this is where we're going to release little chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. And so once it passes down the axon as an action potential, when it gets to the ends, it has to be converted to a chemical signal. And that's what the axon terminals are going to do for us. And so you do have a handout, and we labeled this in class, but just in case you didn't, A are the dendrites, those are my receivers. B is the soma, or the cell body, that's what contains the organelles. C is the axon, that's the tail that carries the message away from the cell body. And D is our axon terminals, which are going to convert that electrical signal into a chemical signal. And so let's just kind of quickly match this up. The dendrites, they're receivers. All right, the cell body is going to have organelles. The axon is going to carry the message away, okay, away from the cell body to the axon terminals. And the axon terminals are going to convert it into a chemical signal. Now, the neurons are not the only cells that you'll find in the nervous system. There's other ones known as glial cells or neuroglia. And when we get to the nervous system, we'll talk about their jobs in more detail. There's certain ones that are found in the peripheral nervous system, which are like all your nerves. And there's certain ones that are found in the central nervous system, which are your brain and spinal cord. And we can kind of just summarize their main functions into three main roles. They can nourish, they can provide nourishment to those neurons, they can protect them, like in the case of, protecting them from pathogens and things like that. And they can also insulate. So on your axons, we often have this insulation called the myelin sheath. And so there's going to be some cells that can help produce that insulation. All right, and that's where we're going to end that video. We've got one more to go to finish up chapter 4.